We are going to start off with the business session here, and also start off with any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose.
No.
Nope.
There are none. We'll move on to the general public comment section. And currently, there is no one here for general public comments. Is there anybody online? Okay. Wonderful. We will close general public comments and move on to the business items. Section 3.1, General Plan, Water Chapter. Review and discuss the draft water use and preservation element, which outlines the city's coordination with regional water providers, watershed protection priorities, and recommended strategies for long-term water conservation. And we do have our third party here with Landmark to be able to present on this.
Okay. I'm just going to run through this really fast with y'all. We didn't get to do it in the work session. But it's just kind of a quick overview, and it may kind of create light bulbs or connect points. It may also bring up new ideas for you. So I'm going to start here by just going back to the language of what the state is looking for. And I will note that the current draft you have in front of you was shared with the state, and they did return back their approval of this draft, that it met the requirements. So what the state's looking for in this part of the general plan is four main requirements. One, that the plan look at the effect of permitted development or development patterns on water demand in infrastructure, the methods of reducing that water demand and per capita use for existing and also for future development, and the opportunity for the municipality to modify operations to eliminate practices or conditions that waste water. Now, as you are all aware, you're not a water provider. So I think that where this draft is really leaning into is two things. One, ways in which the land use permitting and development, the land development process looks at water as part of its conditions and standards and ordinances is part of one way in which you can influence this conversation. The other is the education and outreach. So the plan kicks off with a mission statement, which is we've kind of reviewed, discussed. I think if you're generally comfortable with the language, I think we have noted the watershed might be better clarified as just the water source or some other similar language. But otherwise, that's kind of the goal of what the city's hoping to achieve here. Then the plan looks at your regional position. You're within the Jordan River Basin, which is contributing to the greater Salt Lake watershed. And within the Salt Lake region, the state has a goal of an 11% reduction in use by 2030. So those are percentages they're reevaluating currently. And then more specifically, the Department of Public Utilities, which is your water provider, has the goal to reduce per capita use from 179 gallons per day to 146. And here's that map of how you're served by your utility providers. Basically everything except for a little bit of the Fort Union area is served by Salt Lake City. And so what the city can influence is your land use regulation, leading by example with your city properties and public education and outreach. And that's what this plan is really kind of built around. So we've got this trajectory. It's sort of high pie in the sky math, as we talked about earlier, because we don't have more granular data. But you know, as I think it's important to note that as the relationship between land use and water that the state's looking for, you are a built-out community. You're transitioning to infill and redevelopment as your primary development pattern, and so that new development can promote a more efficient water use than traditional landscaping does, and so that can help achieve some reduction to some degree. The other area is what can we do with their existing land use. And so that's where the plan has identified these 4 water conservation strategies towards reducing water waste. And so looking at your indoor and outdoor use standards, you already have some of these in place, but re-examining and improving landscape ordinances and development codes is needed. Education outreach, encouraging people to connect with rebate programs, workshops, educational programs, and so forth. Partnerships and programs, so leaning into some of the goals that were created with the ISAP, the Interlocal Sustainability Action Plan, and continuing your partnership with Utah Water Savers, and also just increasing communication and partnership with the public utility itself, with Salt Lake Public Utilities. And then finally, using your land use pattern is also a way to conserve water. That targeting smart growth principles within the way you develop future land use projects can also have an impact on water by being more compact and generally. So here are the 4 goals in the back of the plan. Empower the community through education, outreach, and voluntary water conservation. 2, lead by example in water efficiency and community stewardship. 3, strengthen collaborative efforts and promote fair water management. 4, integrate water conservation in the land development and redevelopment pattern. And I think that this area of the plan is really the meat here. This is where the action items lie. If there's a place that we were to discuss further tonight, I would encourage us to spend our time looking at these goals and seeing if we agree with them and the strategies under them. Those strategies have been categorized by short-term, mid-term, and long-term sort of timeframes. So there's some low-hanging fruit that can be knocked out right away, and then there's some things that are longer, more ongoing. So that's just a brief overview. I think we've had some good discussion in the work session on this too, but entertain further questions and comments from you all.
Thank you. I know that Commissioner Shelton had some good insight on this in regards to his time spent on the subcommittee for this in reviewing the general plan. Commissioner Shelton, would you mind jumping in on that for some proposals?
A couple of thoughts. If you go back a couple of slides, you said the city can influence.
Sorry, I'm going back. Come on. Yep.
So you said you use that statement, and it seems to be a limiting statement on the city's right or responsibility. The city actually can influence and may choose to influence things well beyond that. And
I think you're correct in that, based on some of our discussion that we've had.
so another observation that's kind of general for me, and this goes probably more to other parts of the plan, but is included here as well. So my comment is kind of put your focus on this in other parts of the plan that you'll soon be looking at in the same way.
Okay.
But in the lead-in statement, we say Utah is one of the driest states in the nation. This reality coupled with years of severe drought and rapid population growth. Through our plan, as it's written today, we hammer on this thought of rapid population growth. While that may be true in some parts of the county, over the last 10 years, the opposite of that has been true in our city. Our population is smaller than it was 10 years ago. And so we haven't seen rapid population growth. I don't think anyone that I've talked to, and I've talked to several, expect to see rapid population growth or potentially any population growth. And certainly the concept that our population growth will happen by means of the growth in household size is again contrary to the data. In an aging population, it's not very likely to happen. At least that's been my experience. So I think we have to be really careful not to put too much weight, if any, on population growth. And I'll just leave, there's a statement there that hits on that. If you go down to the last slide, and this kind of comes to mind, maybe not the last one, but yeah, that one. Integrate water conservation in land development and redevelopment process. In our conversations today, we've had a lot of conversation about property rights and individual liberty and your ability to do what you see fit without too much influence of the government. It's interesting to think about if that statement is far-reaching or if it's much more limited. To integrate water conservation and land development. I think for us, we've said generally, we are not going to enforce water conservation. We're going to educate water conservation. The enforcement that we think is most powerful is that enforcement that comes by price. And so I'm not sure what that means, that fourth point, but I'm concerned that it might mean more than what we hope.
So let's take a look at the strategies that are under goal 4. So short-term, review and update land development standards, and also to review and remove barriers to water conservation, such as unnecessary and conflicting regulations, complex procedures, overlapping or ineffective incentives to ensure clear, consistent standards. And then long-term, actively promote and incentivize infill development and plan for and incorporate green infrastructure solutions within projects to manage stormwater, recharge groundwater, and improve water quality with runoff. So
Of those, the first one I think would be the riskiest of those.
Riskiest one. Anyone else want to offer thoughts on that?
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I mean, we have those ordinances in place today. I mean, we have ordinance, I don't know the specifics, but there are things that if you're doing a new build or something, you have to have certain percentage of, has to be water wise and that kind of thing. I mean, so those things are there today.
They are.
And I don't think, and maybe that's what, maybe we need to say instead of review and update, if applicable or something, instead of just saying we're going to do it. I don't know if that would be.
I don't know necessarily what review and update means.
Right.
If that means eliminate or add or change in some meaningful way. So that, that language is ambiguous in terms of what its hope is.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Oh, just had a couple of insights in what that might mean in a practical sense. So this would inform any type of a text amendment to adapt or change landscaping standards or other elements of the code. Those would all be things that we would bring back to the Planning Commission to say, hey, we have this goal. We've reviewed the code. These are areas that we think we could do better. What do you think? So this wouldn't be a catch-all like we have to do it. It's just opening the conversation. And one example that we actually talked about earlier today as a staff is in our commercial zones, if you're adjacent to any type of residential use, we require a 15-foot landscape buffer around the property. That might be an area that we could say, do we really need 15 feet of landscape there? Could we replace that with a wall instead to provide some type of a buffer? That would result in water savings because now you're not having to landscape and irrigate a 15-foot strip of land around a commercial property. So it would be little fine-tuning things like that. The ordinance already minimizes the amount of sod that you can have on commercial and multifamily projects. Where that can be located, it has to be functional space. So there's a lot of ways that the current code could be reviewed through the lens of water conservation, but not necessarily mandating sweeping changes citywide for residences or other established businesses. So, and it would also only apply for new development or redevelopment. We're not forcing people to retrofit and change what they have. Looking forward, we're just saying, how can we be more water conscious, and what types of things as a city could we update to be, I guess, more in tune with that type of a mentality. So,
And I think maybe the distinguishing factor there is you talked about some ideas that would allow for greater water conservation. You could build a wall instead of putting in landscaping. The challenge is you could also use that same idea to enforce that somebody is now unable to use their property in a way that they would see fit, and do it out of the idea that you have now mandated better water use.
yeah, and I think we would look at it more through the lens of, as Sam had mentioned, and it's on the slide, removing barriers to water conservation. So right now, our code says you have to have a 15-foot landscape buffer. That's a lot more restrictive than us saying you don't have to have that. Do whatever you want with it. But it also saves water. So there's trade-offs with respecting property rights and giving people more liberty. And based on what I've seen in the code, there is a lot of room to improve that, to say we're not going to mandate that you landscape a bunch of stuff if you don't want to, because it uses a lot of water and it's maybe not necessary. So those are the types of avenues that we would explore with that first bullet.
If you added in that first bullet the word permit water efficient practices and policies, that would get to the point that you just made.
That could be fine. We could change that language.
I think it'd be nice to, this may be beyond the scope of our agenda here, but just, I don't understand the science behind this. In some parts of our city, the water seeps up from the ground into our lawns. In some of those same parts of the city, we can water and it goes directly back into the creek. I don't know how to judge water use in that kind of a situation. Are we wasting water if we water the lawn and it goes into the creek? I'm sure there's a science. I think there's other parts of the city where when you use excessive water, it is truly wasted. Other parts, it kind of is part of the whole recycling. And I just don't know all the science on this. And I feel, as I look at all of this stuff, I'm left scratching my head a little bit about.
Well, I think that goes to one, if you look under the goal one, there's a key action about developing user-friendly tools and that kind of thing to help residents understand that kind of thing. So I think that maybe falls under education, that because I think if you read through a lot of these, that they are about education, because right, I mean it's just like
Different parts of the city have different needs and water is used differently.
right. And I think that the key to, I think a lot of this is education and awareness of how it works, how water works, the science behind it. And that'd be very interesting to pinpoint different areas of the city of why there's seepage.
Get a hydrologist in here or something, but.
That kind of thing. But I think, I mean, I really like how these goals speak to a lot of education. I mean, I think it's a lot of education, not just about the science, but also about what incentives there are and what simple things that can be done as residents to conserve water. So, I mean, I think that that what you're saying falls exactly into, I think, one of the goals.
I agree. And I like the idea that we are not carrying around a big penalty to be placed on people if there's a discrepancy on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of science to this, especially when we start talking about landscapes and we start getting into evapotranspiration and how every plant has a different evapotranspiration rate, and soil and water table and all of those things come into play. And it gets into a very micro level very fast. And that's not something that we can address broadly through policy. And we typically target things that we know is our like easy, like we know lawns use a lot of water, so we attack lawns a lot. That's just like, you know, but yeah, I think to Lucy's point, education is a huge, huge thing. And leading people and encouraging them to understand and know like what their decision, what their actions are, and how they can do better. And I think that goes even to making sure that water conservation measures are actually conserving water. I can put a smart irrigation controller on my system, but if I override it with my own manual settings, I've eliminated all the smartness that it has. I can run a drip irrigation system for hours and it doesn't save a drop, right? So that's where the education is critical.
I'm sorry, under goal 3, the end of the second sentence says the city will support fair and effective water management for all residents. How can the city do that if we don't really control? See where I'm saying?
Yeah. So,
I'm, yeah.
so a lot of the strategies under this are geared at this conversation of what's your relationship like with Salt Lake Public Utilities? To date, there has not been much of a relationship. As we learned, we actually interviewed the public utility, one of their representatives as part of this process, and working along with some planners who aren't here on staff anymore. And it was like they just met each other for the first time. Like, there's never been a dialogue. And I was actually surprised at how open Salt Lake Public Utilities was to having conversation. So a lot of these strategies are kind of structured towards having that relationship and improving that communication with them and trying to get representation, basically, to some
So
degree.
maybe that goes to what we talked about towards the end of our work session about adding in as a goal that saying that Cottonwood Heights needs to have a seat at the table. Whatever, and I don't know how we word that, but so that so the city is represented fairly and also has input into how things happen. So.
Right. And that could take different forms. You know, it could be a liaison that's just regularly trying to understand what the utility's doing, or it could go to more administrative kind of level, like was suggested, to get someone on the board, right? So,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, could I make a comment real quick? So I would imagine that any public utility would have a public process, just like the city does with, you know, they're, I'm sure, going through open house meetings and public hearings to adopt their water plan that directly affects us. And I think one thing that we could do, as Sam mentioned, is have someone at the city as a liaison to be involved and attend those meetings and workshops to help be a voice at the table. It's not necessarily a voting member of their board or whatever council or whoever does that, but at least we're involved and educated along the way in the process. I think that's a valid goal. I guess the concern is just staff time and resources. Who's going to do that? Do we have someone that can allocate the time and attention to fostering those relationships? I think it's an important one, and maybe that doesn't live with the planning staff. Maybe it's some other department or group, someone from Public Works or some form of representation from the city. But I think that would be a good start, is just to be involved in the processes they currently do have, because I can't imagine they're doing everything closed door without any public input. I don't know, Sam, you might have more input on what their current processes are. I'm guessing it would be the Salt Lake City Council that would be making these decisions. We can attend those meetings. We can be there as a council person or planning commissioner and say, hey, you know, your decisions affect our community. This is what we want. As a constituent, sort of. We're not voting for the council people, but they affect what happens here. So that's it.
I think that's a fair point. And, I think there's certain things that we can do to impact that change locally here. I do like the proposal of potentially finding a way to sit on that board and looking what that process looks like just into the future. And I think digging a little deeper on this as we're developing the general plan chapter for this, I think it'd be interesting to look at. I do have a question for the city on this as far as development guidelines that we have, as well as renovation guidelines that we can make changes to immediately just from a water consumption. And I know that in new construction, there's typically a green space requirement. Do we have in the city right now, if somebody tears down a home or goes to a new lot, do we have any requirement as far as, having a minimum amount of green space or grass that needs to be planted or any type of landscaping that needs to be planted for whether it be single family, multifamily, commercial?
Yes, there are indirect standards. So regarding grass or sod, it's actually opposite. The city actually says you're limited on how much you can have, depending on the size of your lot. There's an indirect standard that we have with impervious coverage. So for a lot, you can only have, depending on the zone, 50% of your lot be impervious coverage, meaning rooftop, concrete. The balance would then be landscape, but that landscape can only have a certain percentage of grass, which would mean the balance would be xeriscape or drought tolerant landscape. So yes, we have standards like that, but it's not as direct as you worded it. So we currently have those for residential and commercial properties, but there's no minimum grass you have to have. I think that was an update that was made a few years ago in the landscape ordinance. So
I know that some adjacent cities have had that requirement and they've been working on eliminating that. I just want to make sure that there's not anything here that we need to make immediate text amendments or change in relation to that we should probably look at from a strategy standpoint immediately. But
yeah, and as part of goal 4, that's what we would do is, review the land development code, kind of do an audit to see, what's in here, looking at it strictly from water conservation. What are all the policies and standards that are in there currently that would influence water, and then reassessing to see, does this make sense? Is this something we want to change, explore? So that would be a separate effort. But I think the staff a few years ago did that for landscape standards specifically. I don't know how comprehensive it was as a citywide like ordinance review, but I think that's the intent of goal 4 is to do that.
what is the percentage of the city currently that is undeveloped? So this would be the gravel pit. And I think it's really just gravel pit and some of these other little infill areas. But what percentage of the city is that currently?
I don't know an exact number. I mean, it would be probably less than 1%. I mean, small. But I guess the trick is that the city is constantly developing. So everything is most land has something on it now, but whatever's on it now will eventually transition into something different in the future. And that's where these standards would come into play to say, the typical lifespan of a commercial building is 20 to 30 years. So thinking forward, 20 to 30 years from now, all of the commercial projects that you see will probably be something else. And that's where, planning is a very long-term effort. You don't see the fruits right away, but, had someone adopted something like this in the 80s, the city would be a very different place because of all the development that's happened since the 80s. So it takes a long time, but it would be through, as Sam mentioned earlier, incremental growth, infill, redevelopment. So we just be chipping away at it for the next 20 years.
I feel comfortable with the way that the draft stands with some of these minor adaptations. As far as process goes for that, I know that we do need to pass a positive recommendation or a modified recommendation up to the council. What would be the best way for us to imply some of those additional edits?
Yeah, so we'll have to notice this item as a public hearing and hold a public hearing in a future planning commission meeting. So I think Sam has information that he would need to make these tweaks and then bring a polished final version back to the planning commission to then have that public hearing. And in that meeting, you could forward the recommendation to the council. So it doesn't sound like these are sweeping changes that would require a lot of effort.
Great.
So I don't know, Sam, I don't want to speak for you with,
No, I think that this is simple, honestly, fairly simple. I think the things we've discussed here are just adding or editing some of the strategies here in the back of the plan and or in the front of the plan, a couple of the text things we talked about. So it's fairly simple, and I think we could have that taken care of by the next meeting.
Wonderful. And I think if we could look into some additional details in regards to a potential commission within Salt Lake City Water,
Mhm.
of what those efforts would look like
Okay.
to have a voice at that table and potentially become a part of the board, if there is a board. I imagine there is. But because we're the city between the canyons, we do have two major waterways that we impact in many different ways. And I believe that it would be advantageous for us to at least better understand that and create some goals to put us closer to that so that we have a louder voice.
Yeah, we can look into that.
Wonderful. Anything further?
Do we need a motion to table this?
We do need a motion to table this.
I move that we table the water chapter of the general plan to January 7th, the January 7th, 2026 Planning Commission meeting.
So we have a first. We have a second from Commission.
Are we okay with that? That
Yes. My understanding is this is compliance with the state based on how we're doing this.
So I mean, the state doesn't get it. It's not completed at the earliest until.
Correct.
yeah, that's just going to be the reality of the situation. I'll reach out to the Department of Natural Resources and let them know there was a noticing issue and that it's essentially done, but formally can't be adopted until January. So there's not really any repercussions to my understanding for that. So I'll communicate that and get that resolved.
Wonderful. We do need to go to vote. So with this one, I believe we can just go all in favor. Say aye.
Aye.
All right, we will forward this to the January 7th meeting and go through those details then and ensure that we're properly noticing for public hearing. The next item is 4.0 consent agenda
you.
for November 5th, 2025 of the Planning Commission minutes. Were there any changes or details needed to be adjusted on this?
I move that we approve the minutes for November 5, 2025 Planning Commission.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That concludes everything on the agenda. Was there anything further that you guys needed to discuss?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.